Well, there's no denying it. I love historical fiction, and today I'm going to share with you all of the historical fiction I have on my shelves. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. This is a channel where I love to make videos about homeschooling as well as the books I am currently reading. And I have gotten a number of requests to share my historical fiction books with you. And the timing is perfect because we are actually in the process of moving and packing. And so I took all these books off of my shelf and I'm going to pack them. And I thought this would be the perfect time to show them all to you. So I haven't had a bookshelf per se in this current house, but my hopes is that I will in the next house. My hopes are to put up a couple bookcases, maybe in the living room, and put up all my books, both for homeschooling and just the books for myself. So if any of you is interested in maybe seeing me put together bookshelves or getting it all set up, let me know down below. I could always make a video as we're setting that up. But anyway, for today's video, I'm just going to run through all the different books. I'll give you a short blurb, but hopefully not too much, otherwise this video will be too long. So let me start here. So this book, All the Light We Cannot See, by Anthony Doerr, one of my favorite books, World War II story covering two children, a French girl who's blind and a German boy who's an orphan who gets taken up by the Hitler Youth. So you follow his story as he joins the Nazi Party and her story as she joins the resistance of sorts, and then their stories merge, if you will. Next book I have here is The Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys. I really like this book. It's about the Spanish Civil War. It's about this girl who survived it. Her parents were part of the losing party, if you will. I can't remember exactly how it was set up. And so they're struggling, and she has a job at a hotel where she meets this boy from America, and he is like into photography, and he starts to investigate Franco's dictatorship and starts to kind of stir waters there, and that's really bad for her. It was a good glimpse into that part of history, which I just know nothing about. So let's see, next is a Philippa Gregory book, which this is the only one I own. I've tried to read a number of them, but I have yet to really get into her stuff. This one's called The Lady of the Rivers, and it is part of the Cousins War series. It's number 2, maybe? I'm not quite sure. It has to do with the Duchess of Bedford, and it has to do with the War of the Roses in England and France, I believe. Definitely Tudor England, kind of what Philippa Gregory is known for. Next, Pull of the Stars. Love this book by Emma Donoghue. It has to do with the Spanish flu in Ireland, and it's following the perspective of a nurse as she is working in a maternity ward with women who are pregnant, about to give birth, but also have the flu. And I thought the author did a really good job with explaining the flu, explaining kind of the current medicine at that time. So I really enjoyed that book. Next, As Bright as Heaven by Susan Meisner. This is probably still my favorite book of 2020. I really enjoyed that. This was another Spanish flu book. So I'm hoping to do a review of these two from kind of a microbiologist perspective. But in the case of this book, it has to do with a family living in Philadelphia, which is one of the hardest hit cities in the US. And they move into Philadelphia because the dad got a job with his uncle at a mortuary, and then the flu hits, and then they kind of see the side of the flu from kind of that business side point, but also the family, and then they take in a flu orphan, and that's just a beautiful part of the story. It was just an amazing book that had a lot of beautiful family elements, and then the Spanish flu part was very interesting, especially to me. Some people might not appreciate that at this point in history, but I did. Next, Rebecca. So I put this in my historical fiction section, even though it's kind of gothic, it's kind of romance, it's kind of classic, but I feel like it has a historical fiction aspect to it, mainly because of some of the elements of the location and the atmosphere. But this is about a woman who gets married, comes back to the estate of her new husband, only to find out that he was previously married, and all of the staff really loved his old wife, named Rebecca. And so she has to contend with all of that. Next up, Kristen Hanna book, The Great Alone. So this is a book about a Vietnam vet that comes back. He's definitely struggling with PTSD. He has anger issues. He decides to uproot his family and move them to Alaska, and it's just kind of that story from there. I think it follows kind of classic Kristen Hanna challenging storylines, so that looks really good. Next I have Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. And this looks really good. It's about this girl who grew up in the marsh. I think she was abandoned in the marsh, something like that. And then there is a boy that goes missing or is murdered, and for some reason people blame her. And that's where the story starts. Okay, next, A Gentleman in Moscow. This is by Amor Towles. I really enjoyed this book. It's about a man who is sentenced to house arrest in Russia just after the revolution, I believe the Russian Revolution, so the 1930s, and he's like a person of interest. He was part of the aristocratic society, I believe. Anyway, so this whole book is told from his point of view, from having to live in this hotel for I think like 60 years or something like that. It was really good. Next is another World War II book. It's called We Were the Lucky Ones by Georgia Hunter. So this was another really good World War II book. It takes the point of view of a Jewish family from Poland, which was one of the first countries to kind of be invaded by the Germans early in the war. It follows multiple storylines of all the different family members in this Jewish family as they go through just kind of horrific ordeals, but it was very good, very well written. I really enjoyed that one. Next is Beneath the Scarlet Sky by Mark Sullivan. Haven't read this yet. Looks so good. World War II. The take here is it's from Italy, which I feel like there aren't that many World War II books that are set in Italy. And this follows a teenager who somehow gets wrapped into helping Jews, so he's part of the resistance. Then his family forced him to enlist in the Hitler's army, basically, because I think they're scared for him. And then he gets a post driving around this important Nazi officer in Italy. So it sounds really good and probably really challenging. So next is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. This is about the last woman who was executed in Iceland, I believe. And so she was accused of killing, I think, 2 men. She was sentenced to execution, and then they had to put her somewhere because they didn't have like the equipment for the execution. So they put her in this remote farm, and the story is more about that, about like the family that has to house her, as well as her time there waiting for execution. So it sounds just really good. Next is The Underground Railroad. This is by Colson Whitehead, and I haven't read any of his books yet. This is the only one I own, and this sounds really good. It's about some slaves trying to escape via the Underground Railroad. And they're able to do that, and I think it tells their story as they get to different locations and they feel they might be safe, but they find that they're not, that they're still slave hunters after them. So it sounds just really good. Next is a World War II book. So it's The Book Thief. So this is more of a middle grade book, and it was really good. It's about this German girl who loses her family and becomes adopted by her foster parents. Her foster father decides to teach her to read. She's very interested in reading. She stole this book kind of accidentally on her way to their house, and then she starts stealing more and more books as her form of resistance against the Nazis and things like that. It's got some really powerful messages. So I really enjoyed this book. Okay, next is called In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez. It is a historical fiction based off of a true story of these sisters in the Dominican Republic during the 1960s. And they are part of kind of a resistance against the dictatorship. They become kind of people of interest. They're nicknamed the Butterflies by the government, and they actually do become targeted and assassinated by the government. So it sounds just very interesting. So I'm looking forward to this book. Okay, next is called The Heiress of Winterwood by Sarah Ladd. I think this is a Christian literature book, but it has to do with this woman who's an heiress of an estate, but she promises her friend who is dying that she will take care of her baby. And so then I think this woman gets married, and then the baby gets kidnapped, and there's a ransom of some sort. So it sounds very intriguing. So I'm looking forward to picking that one up. The next one I've had on my shelves for maybe, 15 years. It's called Labyrinth by Kate Moss. And it just sounds very interesting. It's about this story where in the present day they find like cave drawings, and I think cave drawings of this strange like pattern, a labyrinth. And then it tells also this story, I believe it hops back and forth, of 800 years ago, what was happening, how was this formed, where are these clues? So it kind of feels like a national treasure sort of book. So it sounds very good. So that I've kept it for so long because I think it will be good. Just have to pick it up. Okay, the next one on my list is The Known World by Edward P. Jones. So this is a story set in the South and right after the Civil War. So it's a story of a former slave as he owns property and he's trying to follow kind of the letter of the law so nobody gets him, if you will. He dies, and then his widow has to take over, but she can't do things as perfectly as her husband did. And so that just sounds very interesting. Next book on my shelf is The Other Einstein by Marie Benedict. And so this is another historical fiction based off a true story of Einstein's first wife, who he met at the university, I think in Zurich. And she was just really gifted and really smart, and she pursued physics as opposed to marriage and children, which was very strange during that time frame. I'm not sure if this is talked about in this book, but I do know that there is some kind of controversy of the fact that she might have played a really big role in Einstein developing special relativity, which just sounds so fascinating to see kind of how she played that role. Okay, a couple more. All right, I have another Kristen Hanna book, which I loved. I read this last year, which really sparked me getting back into reading. It's a fantastic book. It really made me cry a bunch. It's just so heart-wrenching. But it's about two sisters that are in France during the time of the occupation of the Nazis. Her husband, or at least the older sister's husband, was sent off to the French army, and so her and her daughter are left at home, and then Nazi officers often would stay in the houses, and so it just kind of talks about that. And her friend who's a Jew, and oh, it's got so many tug on your heartstrings sort of moments, but it's very good. Another book I have is A Library of Legends by Janie Chan. It's set right before World War II in China, Japan sort of area. So there's this girl who is a student at a university, and her, along with a lot of her classmates and other professors and people associated with the university, flee the university on foot because of the threat of bombings. And so they take with them important documents. So a lot of mythologies, folklores, documents of their part of the country, and they go on the run, basically, is what this story is about. I'm looking forward to picking that one up. So this book is another Susan Meisner book, A Bridge Across the Ocean, and this follows war wives. So this is after World War II. So these are women who fell in love with American soldiers during the war. So they could be French, English, all over Europe. And they are going to this port, and they're getting put on a boat to be sent to their husbands in America. It follows a couple different women and their stories throughout the war and how they got here. And then there are some ghostly elements. Next is The Alice Network by Kate Quinn. It's a book that spans kind of World War I and World War II. So World War I is where the Alice Network was set up. It's a group of spies that were working against the Germans. And then something happened and it dissolved. And then the storyline gets picked back up right after World War II, where this girl travels to Europe looking for her cousin, and I think stumbles upon some part of the Alice Network, and then they work out some of the mysteries, I believe. It's a little hard to tell, but sounds really good. Okay, next book is Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. I feel like I've talked about this book so much on my channel. It's been in so many different TBRs. I still haven't read it, but I'm so excited to still pick it up. So it's about a man and a girl who kind of stumble into a pub in London. It looks like the girl's dead, and then suddenly she revives after like hours. So it's like a miracle. And then after this miracle, all these people come in and they're like, well, she's my daughter, or she's my cousin's da, da, da. So a lot of people feel like they have ownership over her. And it's like, what's the real story? And she is mute, so she's not talking. So it just sounds very interesting, like what is going on there. So, okay, next one is a Kate Morton book. So this is The Clockmakers Daughter. So in classic Kate Morton style, there's kind of dual timelines, and it starts with a mystery back in the 1860s of these artists who went to this like mansion house or this cottage, and they were all hanging out for the summer, and then something happened. I can't remember if it's like a murder or a theft, but something happens, and then there's a group of people in the present time that are looking into what happened. So it sounds very interesting. All right, last book. Wow, I feel like I've talked very fast. I hope it hasn't been too crazy. But my last book is The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes, which this book a lot of people have loved, and it sounds just fascinating. And so it's about a group of librarians in Kentucky during, it says Depression era America, and their job or their calling is to bring books west, kind of bring books to people who don't have books. It just sounds really good, and a lot of people have really liked it. So I'm looking forward to that. I haven't read a ton from kind of the Depression era in my historical fiction. And so these are the books that are on my historical fiction shelf, and they will be finding a new spot soon. But thank you for taking the time to watch my video. Please let me know below if you have read any of these books. If any of them are your favorites, or if you're wanting to read them, I would love to know that. And so, yeah, thank you for stopping by, and please consider liking the video. It helps out my channel. Subscribing if you want to, if you like this kind of content. Otherwise, I will see you in the next book video. All right, have a wonderful day. Okay, bye.